Welcome to Marriage IQ, the podcast for the intelligent spouse.
I'm Dr. Heidi Hastings.
And I'm Dr. Scott Hastings.
We are two doctors, two researchers, two spouses, two lovers, and two incredibly different human beings coming together for one purpose: to transform the stinky parts of your marriage into scintillating ones, using intelligence mixed with a little fun.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another exciting episode. We are finishing up our episode on vulnerability, and we had so much good stuff to talk about, we decided to split it up.
We thought we could do it all in one, and it was so good it didn't happen that way.
In our previous episode of Marriage IQ, we talked about how men and women are very different in the way that they approach vulnerability and connection. And how do we make that work? We talked about both intentional and unintentional vulnerability, and how intentional vulnerability is really an emotionally intelligent way of life,
right,
to gain deeper connection with your spouse, whereas unintentional vulnerability can lead to a lot of shame. And we talked about shame hangover.
Yep.
We talked about exposing yourself, taking that risk, and then having it backfire and dealing with the emotions from all of that.
I'm really glad that you brought that up. This is a great way to start, because it's important to know, as we start cracking open some of those walls that we've put around ourselves, it's not pain-free. It may cause some discomfort. It may cause some difficulties. But ultimately, if we can learn to sit through that, it leads very often to growth and to greater emotional maturity and to more intimate relationships.
I agree. I like that. Let's widen the lens here a little bit.
Okay.
Let's talk a little bit about hiding. And we alluded to this last
No, wait,
time.
what do you mean by that? That we are not vulnerable? Because what do you mean by that?
Well, we want to avoid being vulnerable with our spouse, so we hide things.
Yep.
We want to avoid the discomfort of being vulnerable.
The pain,
with our
like
spouse.
I was just talking about. Yeah.
Yeah, this imagined emotional pain. So let's widen that lens. It's easier not to tell your spouse about, let's say, your porn problem.
Or gambling problem or eating problem.
So let me tell you, I thought about keeping my porn use a secret from you.
Mm-hmm.
It was really tempting. Let me tell you, I didn't want that emotional pain from your reaction.
And can I just say, as much as it hurt for you to tell me about that, I would far rather know what reality is.
Yeah, I think most spouses would. Usually it's the wife. The secrecy is its own protection strategy. Remember, we talked about that last time.
Mm-hmm.
Brené Brown talked about secrecy, and we did too, as being a protection strategy.
Right.
It feels like that no harm, no foul type of life. But is it really?
Well, secrecy does all kinds of damage. It truly does. That is at the root of the damage caused by infidelity, by addictions, by all kinds of things. If we know what we're working with, even if it hurts, even if we get upset with each other, we can ultimately come to a place where we can be supportive of each other to work through it, right?
Yes.
But in secrecy, things grow. In the darkness, they grow, and then they become completely unmanageable and do a lot more destruction to a marriage.
So, again, our point here is keeping secrets, sweeping things under the rug, nothing to see here type of a life and type of a marriage is not going to be scintillating.
That's right.
It's not going to sizzle. I'm sorry. It's not going to happen.
And doesn't allow for vulnerability.
And let me tell you, there are a lot of marriages that live in this mindset. Don't ask, don't tell secrets. don't get vulnerable.
Mm-hmm.
And
And they're roommates.
they're roommates.
Yeah. Come and
So,
go.
and they're fine with this. They're totally fine with this.
Well, one partner is for sure, but they wouldn't be doing it.
Well, and
The
sometimes
other partner may not be.
both are fine because
Yeah.
they don't know anything. They don't know about this intentional vulnerability that we and Brené Brown are trying to bring out.
Yeah.
So there's this other term we call astroturfing.
Mm-hmm.
We've talked about that in the past too.
Mm-hmm.
Astroturf is that green grass that looks beautiful from the outside.
So you get up close.
They put it on the football fields, right? Because you don't have to water it. You don't have to mow it. You don't have to weed it. It creates this false appearance of openness while hiding the truth underneath.
Yeah.
It's the illusion of honesty that kills that connection.
Right.
And I will have to say, sharing my experience about my previous porn use is pretty darn vulnerable right now.
It absolutely is. Yeah. Okay, so here's a little twist on vulnerability.
Yeah.
We've talked a lot about how vulnerability can be a risk.
Yeah.
To tell the deepest parts of
We
us
spent a lot of time on that.
that we think someone may not like is very risky.
Yes.
But also, vulnerability is about joy.
Say what?
Brené Brown was really very surprised to find in her research that some of the most vulnerable moments that people talked about were moments where they felt the most joy, like when they got married or when they had a baby or when they got a new job. And that comes when we are experiencing this very, very beautiful moment. And all of a sudden, our brains go to worst case scenario. When we should be experiencing the fullness of joy, instead, we're damping down the joy that we feel, saying this might not work out or something might happen to my child or whatever it is. And so being truly vulnerable, we have to open ourselves up to this birthplace of creativity, this place of change and love and laughter, and override that inherent, for some people, that inherent desire to not completely feel joy just to protect ourselves
because something bad might happen.
Yes, it's those protections that are coming up again that are keeping us from truly connecting and truly loving and truly being intimate with each other.
So I really like how Brené Brown brings that up. The vulnerability is not just negative or protecting yourself against negative things, but
Right.
but that it is a lot about happiness,
Yeah,
joy.
those moments are vulnerable. It's a time of change.
We talked about this in an earlier episode, but I want to bring it up again. I think about changing seasons. I did some research on this. People like fall and they like spring the best because they are seasons of change. When in the spring, the trees have cute little buds. They're very vulnerable. It's very vulnerable to things happening. You see little YouTube videos on ducklings. Very popular, very adorable, very vulnerable. Little kittens. Why do people like little kittens? Probably the same way, even though they don't know it, like they like sunrises and sunsets as being the best part of the day. Why is that? Because of the change happening, the vulnerability of the sun moving from either morning to day or evening to night.
So are you saying that being vulnerable really opens up the possibility for change in a beautiful way?
In a beautiful way. Change in a beautiful way. And I think people don't sit down and think about this. They just like watching sunsets. But isn't it true that is a symbolic of vulnerability and being in a vulnerable state? Another way to approach vulnerability using another medical metaphor, is like a vaccine.
Okay.
Going back to the vulnerability where we think we're weak, right? We think, oh no, especially as a guy, I cannot be vulnerable. I can't be weak. That's weakness. I have to be strong. I have to show strength.
Right.
Let's think about how vaccines work. Vaccines work by taking a little bit of what causes the illness. They take a little particle of that, either influenza virus or the SARS-CoV-2 virus, or whatever. Could be measles, and they make it look like that virus and reintroduce it to your immune system. So your immune system treats it as if that's what it is. But instead of killing you, it makes you stronger. And that's exactly what intentional vulnerability is like. It's like a vaccine. Now, not becoming vulnerable and just trying to hide is like shutting everything down during COVID.
Yep.
You remember that?
Ah, what a great analogy.
They shut down schools. They shut down stores. They shut down everything. And guess what? Not only did it not reduce the deaths, it increased them. We know this now. But the problem is we looked at it the wrong way. You cannot forever stay away from the things that may be hurtful to you,
that are risky.
You can't. Just like when somebody asked me about the mask. Yeah, it can block the flow of the virus, but once you take it off, all bets are off. Are you going to live with that mask on? Nope. So that's the medical metaphor here. And I think with so many years past, we have some good data on this. You may disagree with me. I'll be happy to give you the references.
The things that we do to protect ourselves actually end up creating other problems.
That's right. We just shut everything down to any kind of criticism. We don't allow it in. We don't allow any kind of risk to be hurt. It becomes worse.
Right.
All right. So we want to get back to these gender differences between men and women.
Right. That we introduced in part 1.
We are not the same people. Why
Surprise.
on earth are we put together when we're totally different? So we have different views of what it means to be vulnerable. And I'm not trying to stereotype here. But if you have a group population where this applies to over 50% of that population, we're not stereotyping. We're describing trends. So let's talk about these differences and vulnerability. This is a big topic. We talked mainly about emotional vulnerability in marriage, but men are more physically, or males, I should say, physically, they're more vulnerable to die in childbirth. Infant mortality rate in men or males, somewhat higher than females. And men live shorter lifespans than women. That was Rosenfield et al. 1996. They looked at that. Mental. Men tend to have higher suicide rates. They tend to have more antisocial and narcissistic traits. That was done by Rudder et al. 2003. And emotionally, men tend to have lower emotional vulnerability.
Yeah, that's
That
not a
was
surprise.
Levant in 2009. And environmental vulnerability, structural vulnerability. Men are more likely to suffer from occupational hazards than women.
Which is a vulnerability.
Yeah, they die on the job more. They have more social isolation as they get older than women. And that's from the CDC in 2020.
Well, let me share some of the things that we found about women's vulnerability. Physically, they are at higher risk of dying due to childbirth than men. Surprise.
Seeing as we don't deliver children.
Yeah, that's right. They are more prone to autoimmune dysfunction. And both of those come from Fairweather et al. In 2008. Mentally, they're at higher vulnerability for depression, anxiety, histrionic, and borderline traits. And there are a couple of studies, Kruner in 2017 and Silbersweig in 2007, both talked about that. Emotionally, women are more emotionally vulnerable than men, for sure. That's not
Shocker.
much of a surprise. And that is because they have more social networks, more community support with each other. So naturally, there's more of a contextual environment in making meaning. But the downside is that women may externalize their self-worth because they rely so much on what other people think of them, and they make comparisons.
Yeah.
Structurally, environmentally, greater gender-based violence and economic discrimination is targeted toward women, and that makes them very vulnerable.
Indeed.
The World Health Organization showed us that in 2021. That begs the question, can we sit in discomfort when someone else is being vulnerable? Can we sit in discomfort when we really should be being vulnerable and we're not? Whether we feel shame or not, can we do that for growth?
So let me see if I understand here. Can I sit in discomfort when I feel shame? Let's say I have shame hangover because I divulged some very vulnerable information to other people. Should I just sit in it and feel that shame?
Well, shame typically keeps us stuck. So it takes a lot of intentionality to be vulnerable and sit in the discomfort through intentionally being vulnerable. That is what leads to a more scintillating life, a more scintillating marriage.
So this brings up a story. This just happened to me. There is a friend of mine, and he suffered the death of his daughter several months ago. It was traumatic.
Hmm.
And he shared with me that this group of people at his church just didn't say anything to him, ignored.
That had to hurt.
He thought, what is going on?
Hmm.
And they didn't say anything. And even the leader of that congregation.
What?
And so he felt very ostracized.
Yep, I can see that.
He felt shame and also offense that people didn't take this, that they just didn't care. And I sat there and I thought, I don't think those people mean to be rude or to be mean to you. I think this is likely human nature. People, when they don't know what to say, they do not want to say the wrong thing. They don't want to have shame hangover. They want to protect themselves from shame hangover. And so they say nothing. Mm-hmm. And I think what happened is because of that, nobody said anything. And there's this awkwardness between him and everyone else.
And keeps growing probably over time.
Yeah. It was like a wedge. And in reality, they do care, but they don't want to mess it up. They want to protect themselves by the illusion of being perfect. So their version of being perfect is saying nothing. Because if you say nothing, then you can't be accused of saying something wrong.
That's really fascinating. I experienced something similar when going through a divorce. There was a lot of shame on my part around that because I felt like I wasn't enough, which is why the marriage broke up. And when we're in those vulnerable moments, vulnerability not as me divulging something, but being vulnerable because of loss, right? Like your friend that you talk to. And it's in those moments of vulnerability that we must have support. And yet my friends didn't know what to say. And so they just disappeared. They were all married and it was a little bit awkward for them. And they didn't say anything. They didn't reach out. They didn't say, "Are you okay?" And that was really hurtful. So I really encourage, if you are in any kind of social network where there's somebody who becomes vulnerable through life experiences that are really difficult, say something.
Well, and this is what I told my friend. I said, how I would handle this is I would talk to you. I would come up to you and let's say I said the wrong thing. Let's say I said something very insensitive to you,
Okay.
like, at least she's not suffering now, or something to that effect.
And anytime you say
At
at
least,
least,
at least they're not,
that's a
yeah,
cue that you're not.
that you're not saying something right. You're doing it wrong. So that is not the right thing to say. Here's the thing. And I told him this. I said, I think in my head, okay, is it worse to open my mouth and say something wrong? Or is it worse to not say something because I don't want to say something wrong and then not saying anything at all? And I have come to the conclusion that it's much better to say something wrong and try to be empathetic. And after you've offended them, keep coming back
Right.
and keep trying
Keep
to
showing up.
say something right.
Be there with support.
Don't feel shame hangover. Say, that didn't land well. I'm going to try this again. And you keep showing up. That's the key. You keep showing up and you keep trying to change your language, your ability to connect with them. And eventually they will see that you do care about them. And that is far better than doing nothing.
That's good. I like that a lot. Do you think, Scott, that you can be both flawed and fabulous?
Fabulous and flawed, or flawed and fabulous.
Can you be that both at the same time? Is it possible?
Well, of course, yes. We tell ourselves it's not possible, but we're humans, my love.
Yeah.
We will be flawed. I'm sorry. I'm sorry right now. I'm flawed. But so are you. And so is everyone else out there listening to us. So that makes for a pretty nice pool party, in my opinion, when everyone's flawed and we know it and we're okay with that. But we also are fabulous. We like changing. We like growing.
And we're trying hard to be vulnerable in ways that create deeper connection. And can I just go back and say, when you were talking about talking with your friend and how to keep showing up, that really makes me think about the episode with the Louders, where Chad Lauder, his wife, if you haven't heard that episode yet, make sure you watch that. She went through an FBI investigation and was sentenced to federal prison for 7 years, of which she was there 5 years. And to me, the most impactful part of the whole episode is when he said he had stood behind his wife the whole time during the 2 years of the investigation, with neighbors not being kind and all of the things that came with this investigation that just totally rocked both of their worlds. But he said, I stood behind her through that whole thing. And in reality, I regret that I didn't stand in front of her, or at least side by side with her. So all of the things that you were talking about with your friend, just keep showing up, even if you say the wrong things. That applies also to our spouse.
Yes. And don't think about the shame. Just think, okay, wow, I could have done that differently. I'm going to keep showing up for my spouse. I'm going to keep showing up for you. I may not know what to say. I may say the wrong things.
Mm-hmm.
I hate saying the wrong things. But you know what? It is way better for me to say things and have them be wrong and keep showing up intentionally than to say nothing at all. Yeah. I just don't know what to say, so I'm not going to say anything.
All right.
Bad news. Yeah.
Let's give you some action items for this week that you and your spouse can do together.
Let's do that.
Set a time this week to sit down together to create this bubble of vulnerability, meaning we're going to intentionally practice saying vulnerable things to each other.
Yeah.
Like you might start a little bit smaller, or if it's something that's going to rock everybody's world, you might need the help of a therapist with that. But you might start with something like saying, honey, I feel like my eating is out of control. And it's very vulnerable for me to say that. Or you could say something bigger, like I have a problem with online gambling, or our financial situation is more dire than I really led you to believe,
Ugh.
or I'm really not happy in my job anymore. And I know we rely on the security of my income, but I just have to be honest with you about that.
What about I'm not happy in my marriage anymore?
Ooh, well, that would be a hard one to hear.
That might need a therapist.
It might, but also if there are people out there who are hearing that, it's really not unusual for marriages to go through periods of not feeling completely happy. That doesn't mean the big D word, divorce, is an automatic next step. It means let's repair some things.
Right. And even with that, let's go with I'm not happy in my marriage anymore. That is going to be infinitely better than being unhappy in your marriage and not saying anything and
Right.
sweeping it under the rug and
Where
hiding
no
it,
change can happen.
protecting yourself. It might be messy and it might be sad and it might be emotionally taxing, but it's worth it. The scintillating life. You only get one, folks. You only
And
get one.
if there are some things that need to be changed, then we have to say those things to each other, not in a I'm leaving you right away, but let's make some changes.
Then as a spouse, try practicing listening neutrally without judgment.
And if it hurts, sit in discomfort.
Learning to sit in that discomfort. It is hard, but if you do it a lot, it gets better, it gets easier to sit in it.
Another little exercise for you comes back to Dr. Brené Brown's 5 elements of being more vulnerable, opening ourselves up to vulnerability and our spouse up to vulnerability. And that's empathy, listening without trying to fix them, showing compassion, speaking kindly to ourselves and to our partner, and
Like that.
feeling those feelings of kindness and compassion towards ourselves and our partner. Connection, sharing things with them that we've never shared with them before that help us understand each other better and each other's way of thinking and each other's former experiences.
Gottman card deck.
Yep, that's what
Every
we do
Friday
every
night.
Friday. Yeah. And then gratitude, thanking our spouse for small acts of being vulnerable or watching for things that they do that are good.
That's called, in our marriage, Thanos.
Yeah, we'll reveal that to you another
We'll
episode.
talk about it later.
Yeah. And then courage. Take emotional risks together. Sit down and do this together. Open up your heart. Open up what's important to you together. So, Scott, can you tell us how this relates to our 4 cornerstones?
Well, let's look at our identity. Who are you when you're exposed? When you're at your most vulnerable moments? Intentionality. Are you intentionally choosing to be courageous with yourself and your spouse? Insight. What's the story you're telling yourself? With this shame hangover, is that true? Are those people really
Thinking those things?
thinking those things?
Are you really less than those you're comparing yourself to?
And intimacy. Can you be known and loved at a deeper level that you've never been known or loved before. As a final thought, T.S. Eliot, an author, he said, quote, "Only those who risk going too far can possibly find out how far they can go."
Ooh, that's pretty cool. Well, everybody, that wraps it up for this episode of Marriage IQ. We hope that by listening to both episodes on vulnerability, you have a greater understanding of this amazing way that we can reach deeper and deeper intimacy.
And remember, the intelligent spouse knows that to change from a stinky to a scintillating marriage first requires a change in themselves.
We hope that you liked today's episode and that you'll follow us on whatever podcast format that you're listening on. Help us get more followers so more people can find us and learn about us. Also follow Marriage IQ on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube.
And head on over to marriageiq.com to grab your free ebook that we just updated
Yep.
on building a scintillating marriage.
If you've already done it, do it again because it's much more in depth now. And we'll catch you, everybody, next time on another exciting episode of
Marriage IQ.